Welcome back, friends. It's Sandy here, and today I'm sharing my painting with embossing powder technique. I'm going to be making 3 cards, a slimline, a mini slimline, and an A2, and we're using with the Hammermill white cardstock. I'm going to be using WOW embossing powders, and I've recorded all the names over on my blog post for you, and the link is underneath this video. And for my stamp today, I'm using the new Magic Stars background. It's from Simon Says Stamps, and it's the Make Magic release that just came out the other day and is part of today's blog hop. This is a beautiful background stamp, and it has a rubber backing. Nice and big. It's like a 6x6. So in order to do my painting, I have created these little scoop tools out of plastic straws, and I've had these forever, as you can tell by the Ziploc bag. I've probably had these for 10 years. That's how long I've been doing this technique. And so all you do is you take one of those plastic straws and you're just going to snip it on an angle, and then it creates the little scoop for you, just like that. You also need a folded piece of photocopy paper, and you put that underneath before you start doing the painting, which I forgot to do in the first one, as you will see. It's a lot cleaner if you put it down first. So I'm using my MISTI for this technique. I'm taking out the foam and the paper because I've got the width in my rubber stamp. And I'm mounting my rubber stamp to the inside of the lid of my MISTI, and I'm going to be stamping down into the base. So I have my cardstock. I'm going to be using some Tombow removable adhesive, and I'm adding some to the back of the piece that I'm going to be stamping on, and I'm laying on top of my rubber stamp to get it positioned where I want it. And then this time I'm going to close the base instead of the lid, and my paper is going to stick to the base because of the adhesive. So don't forget to use your anti-static mat. Make sure that you get rid of all the sticky fingerprints and everything else that's on your paper, and use Versamark. It's very important to make sure that your Versamark is juicy for this technique because it takes a little bit to get all the embossing on there. You don't want it to dry before you get all your embossing powder on. So as you'll see right here, I give it a really good rub, and then I stamp it a second time just to ensure that I have a really good coverage of all of this ink across the complete surface. Next, you want to remove your art piece from your MISTI, and you want to close your MISTI because you don't want to have to clean embossing powder out of it or off the good side of your rubber stamp. Laying it down on your work surface. And this is where you want to slide that folded piece of photocopy paper underneath your art piece to catch any of the stray embossing powder. So I'm starting with the purple, and you'll see how I just scoop it up, and then I'm tapping the side of the straw with my finger just to disperse it out across my art piece. And you don't need to fill the whole thing in because we're going to shake it and move it around once we're done. So either side of that, I've gone to the gold. And then I'm going to use this, I think it's kind of a cranberry red. As I said, I will list all the colors in my blog post for you. Okay, so I got red on both sides, and then I'm going to come in with this blue. So this is about the time that I discover that, hey, I should have put that piece of paper underneath here first, and I try and do that. And of course I bang it, but we were going to bang it anyway. So you want to just bang it and slide it around and get that embossing powder all over the place. Make sure that you've got all of your stars covered. If you don't, you still have the opportunity to go back and add some more embossing powder because we haven't heat set it yet. So there was a little bit of blue and a little bit of gold missing, so I'm just adding that to it. And you'll notice that I'm taking it from the embossing powder jar, not that mess that's on my paper. That's already been combined, so it's not that great. At this point in time, you want to heat set it, and you end up with these beautiful shiny stars. Aren't they pretty? So you're going to stamp all 3 of them like this, and I just wanted to quickly show you what I did with the slimline card. I started at the bottom, okay, and I inked up, and then I stamped twice, and then what I did was I marked where I had stamped to, and I moved that down so that I could stamp that final section. And you may have noticed I just spilled my embossing powder. So another good hint would be make sure your embossing powder is not sitting on the paper you're working on. So if it happens to move, you don't spill it all over the place. So here I am. I'm adding some sticky to the back of the top portion of my slimline card, placing it back on and securing it again to the base of my MISTI, opening up again and adding some more ink so I can just stamp the top portion. If you happen to overlap the stamping, which I eventually do, and I think I show you in the video, that's usually where I put a sentiment or an embellishment or some kind. I don't worry too much about lining it up completely. There's always something that you can do to cover it up. So here I have the long one out and I'm ready to play with my embossing powder. And I'm going to start this time with that beautiful turquoise blue going angling across the center. And again, just shake out a little bit because we're going to be moving it around and it will stick to the rest of the embossing powder. So here's a nice kind of green filigree and I'm putting that on either side. I like to change out the colors every once in a while and just see what you come up with. And of course, it also depends. If you're playing with flowers, then you want maybe, you know, the pinks and yellows for the flowers. You want the green for the stems and the branch and the leaves. When you're doing abstract like this, pretty much anything goes. I decided on gold for the outside edge, and this is the sparkly gold. It's not the flat gold. And I would say, in my experience with this technique, that the solid image embossing powders work better than the ones that have glitter in them. It's a more solid image, and it shows through a lot better for this technique. But that said, the glimmer's kind of pretty to play with. So here I've shaken it out again, moving it around, shaking it onto my scrap paper. When I first started doing this technique, I saved all that embossing powder. I never used it. I eventually threw it out. And you use very little embossing powder for this technique. So as you may know, a bottle of embossing powder can last you a really long time. I've embossed all three of my card fronts, so now I'm moving on to the next step, which is adding the background. And this is the embossed resist technique because, of course, the ink that I'm putting on is going to be resisted by the embossed stars, and I just have to wipe them off at the end. So I'm using the same colors as I did in the last video. So we are playing with, what are we playing with here? Antique Linen, Evergreen Bough, and Wilted Violet. And as I've got the violet on there, I've decided that maybe that wasn't such a great choice in color. So I decided to bring in Blue Print Sketch. And I learned from something the other day that adding the Blue Print Sketch over top of the Wilted Violet gives a really, really nice royal blue. So I'm just going back in and I'm adding my second layer of color to the ones in the center. And now I'm going to bring in that blue and I'm going to go over top of the purple on both sides. Now see the pretty blue that I get out of this? It's just a real royal blue. It's absolutely gorgeous. But the purple shines through, and on purpose I do not completely cover it up because I want the purple to shine through. So I'm just adding that, and then I'm going to go back in and I blend a little bit of green more into the center, blending that line out. And I'm also blending the line to the blue out a little bit as well. Then I decide to put a really thin layer of green over top of the linen because it was just a little bit too bright. And adding my final coat of the blue over top of the Wilted Violet. And then I'm going to take my cloth and I'm going to rub all of the ink off of the top of my embossed stars. And this really makes them pop. And there you get kind of a galaxy background. Isn't it pretty? For the slimline card, I used Wilted Violet, Salty Ocean, and Blue Print Sketch, and basically did exactly the same thing as I just showed you on the slimline card. And you'll notice that I point something out. That was a little dot that came off, and that's just a great place for an embellishment. So why am I showing you my ink pad? Because I've got glitter on it. And you will too when you do this technique. Here's how to get rid of it. Use a piece of Scotch tape and just pop it over where you got any glitter or embossing powder, and then just tape it right down to your work surface. Finishing off my slimline card, I trimmed it and mounted it to a piece of white and then to a piece of Simon Says Stamps Blue Violet card base. I added the Wishing You Joy dies, which I cut out 3 times and layered, and I did the blending technique on the top piece so that it matched my card. And then the snowflake on the left is the Daphne snowflake from Simon Says Stamps. And I cut that out in white glimmer paper, so it's really sparkly. You might not be able to see it in this video though. And then to the center of that, I added the Spellbinders Color Essential Gems in silver, and they are just absolutely fabulous. They have lots of faucets, so they're really sparkly. To add all of this on, I used my Barely glue with that nice little tip, and I also ran it all the way across my sentiment. And I want to tell you, once it was dry, you couldn't see. So it truly does dry clear. For that top layer of my sentiment, I just blended these 2 colors together and die cut it out and glued it to the top of the stack. For the next card, this is the pretty little slimline, and I again matted it in white. This time I have it on the pretty, it's called Royal Purple from Simon Says Stamps. That's my card base, and I use the You Shine sentiment die. And then for the stars, I actually use the Tonic Studios star dies. I love these. There is a whole pile in this kit. So I use this one here, the outside 2, to create the outline star. And then when I flip this back over, there's a great big moon circle at the bottom. I cut that out of Mere Gold and use that to create my tiny little stars that I've got all across the front of my card. Nice and shiny. For the A2 card, I also trimmed it down, matted it in white, and it's the blue violet base from Simon Says Stamps. Then I cut the sentiment, the paper hugs, 3 times from the same cardstock and layered them. And then I put a very thin coat of clear paper glitz from Picket Fence Studios, and it just gave a nice shiny and sparkly finish, also to my fingers. I created the background for these with the Nouveau Shimmer Powders, Lilac Waterfall, Blue Blitz, and Falling Leaves. And you just wet the paper, add the dry powder, and move it around. It's just beautiful to work with. This is a shaker card. I created that with the shaker creators from Tonic Studios. You can order those through Simon as well. And then the sentiment over top, You're Simply the Best. And I have a vellum background behind that one as well. The other card, I did silver embossing with the Magic Stars background stamp, and then I cut the sentiment out of Silver Mirror, and this is Live in the Moment. So there we go. There's all 3 of the cards that I created with my painting with embossing powder technique. I love this Christmas card. I think this is my favorite of the 3. And I'll probably be making a few more of those. I just wanted to give you a little quick of each one. Look at the glimmer on the sentiment on that one. That paper glitz is really fun to play with. And then here's my little mini slimline. I have a friend in mind for that. Everything that I've used today is linked underneath this video. There's also a link over to my blog for some additional information. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving me a comment and a thumbs up. And until next time, toodles!